If you can play Chopin, I'll marry my daughter to you." That was how Arthur Wittmann, CEO of the prestigious financial consulting firm Meridian Capital, ended his cruel joke right in front of 40 executives gathered in the lavish grand hall on the 30th floor. Laughter rippled through the room while Nicholas Washington, a 32-year-old man, stood silently beside his cleaning cart right next to a gleaming Steinway grand piano. The cutting remark had all started simply because Nicholas had politely asked permission to clean around the piano during the company's year-end gala. "Look, everyone," Arthur said, raising his glass of Dom Perignon, his voice tinged with drunken amusement. "Our janitor here seems to have quite a thing for this piano. Maybe he thinks he can play something other than rap music, right?" Nicholas kept his gaze on the floor, but his jaw tightened slightly. There was something about the straightness of his posture, the way he held the cleaning cloth, his fingertips marked with curious calluses, that clashed with the meekness people expected from someone in his position. "Excuse me, Mr. Wittmann," Nicholas replied evenly, his voice calm and measured. "I just wanted to finish cleaning." Arthur stepped closer, drunk on both alcohol and power. No. Now I'm really curious. Do you even know who Chopin is, Nicholas? Or do you only know those noises you call music?" Across the room, Victoria Wittmann, Arthur's 26-year-old daughter, Harvard graduate, now the company's marketing director, watched with visible discomfort. She had seen her father's prejudice before, but never so openly and crudely. For the first time that evening, Nicholas lifted his head. His eyes met Arthur's directly, with a calmness that made a few people in the room shift in their seats uneasy. "I know Chopin, sir. I know him very well." "Then prove it." Arthur slapped the piano lid a little too hard. "If you can play a proper classical piece, I'll personally double your salary, but if you can't—" He paused, savoring the drama. "Then maybe it's time you found a job more suited to your background." The silence in the room thickened, 40 pairs of eyes fixed on Nicholas, some with morbid curiosity, others with faint pity. No one dared intervene. Arthur Wittmann was notorious for firing people over reasons far smaller than this. Nicholas placed the cleaning cloth neatly on the cart, then walked toward the piano. His movements were precise, almost ceremonial, as if approaching an altar before which he had knelt thousands of times. Victoria noticed something the rest missed: the way he adjusted the piano bench with exact precision down to the centimeter, something only someone who had sat there thousands of times would instinctively do. He touched a few keys lightly, testing the tone with the trained ear of a professional. "What would you like to hear, Mr. Wittmann?" Nicholas asked, catching everyone off guard. Arthur roared with laughter. "Your choice, genius. I'm sure it'll be unforgettable." The moment Nicholas positioned himself before the keys, the air in the room shifted. His relaxed posture controlled breathing, and hands finding their place on the keyboard without hesitation hinted at a truth none of the executives had imagined. If you're following this story as an example of how prejudice can blind people to extraordinary talent right in front of them, remember this: what was about to happen would not only change this evening, but the lives of everyone in that room, in a way Arthur Wittmann would never forget. Nicholas placed his hands on the keys, his gentle touch a sharp contrast to the hostile atmosphere. For a moment, the grand hall was utterly silent, 40 executives holding their breath, waiting for an embarrassing failure. But he began to play. Not Chopin. It was a simple tune, almost childlike. "Mary Had a Little Lamb," played by fingers that clearly understood the piano yet made no show of skill. The notes floated like a confession. Humble, almost trivial. Arthur burst into laughter. "Oh God, Mary Had a Little Lamb, really?" He turned to the guests with exaggerated flair. "See, folks, at least he knows where the keys are." Laughter rippled through the room like a contagious virus. A few executives exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to interrupt their boss's cruel little show. "Go on. Keep going." Arthur clapped his hands, his voice dripping with mockery. "Who knows, maybe you can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, too. We could host a children's concert." Nicholas remained composed, gently, lifting his hands from the keys, his tone as calm as when he'd started. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Mr. Wittmann. As I said, I only wanted to finish cleaning. No. The night is still young." Arthur was clearly relishing every second. "Victoria, come here," he called to his daughter, who had remained on the far side of the room. Did you hear that our janitor here is practically Mozart? Victoria's expression darkened further. A summa cum laude Harvard graduate and a key executive at one of the country's largest financial consultancies, she had seen her father humiliate employees before, but never this publicly, never this viciously. Dad, maybe. It would be better if she began only to be cut off by a sharp gesture from Arthur. Better what he wanted to play. I'm giving him the chance. Arthur stepped in close to Nicholas, deliberately invading his personal space. You know what your kind's problem is, always thinking you deserve more than you're actually worth. Nicholas quietly resumed arranging his cleaning supplies. But Victoria noticed something no one else did: the way he placed each item with precision, as if performing a ritual he had practiced thousands of times. There was something almost hypnotic in that absolute control. Mr. Wittmann. Nicholas looked up, voice steady. May I ask you a question? Arthur smirked, intrigued by the audacity. Of course. Go ahead. Do you truly believe talent has a skin color? The room seemed to freeze. The sporadic tapping of laptop keys slowed, then stopped entirely. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Every eye fixed on Nicholas, the man in the blue janitor's uniform, mop still in hand, whose voice now rang out clear and defiant. Arthur Wittmann, CEO of the company, narrowed his eyes, a mocking smile curling at the corner of his mouth. What did you just say? His voice was low and cold, as if one wrong word would see Nicholas thrown out of the building that instant. Nicholas didn't bow his head. He set the mop aside, then slowly walked toward the long boardroom table where Arthur and the leadership team sat. I asked, do you believe talent depends on skin color? He repeated, each word sharpened like a blade. A few managers exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had ever seen anyone speak to Arthur like this, least of all a black janitor. Arthur gave a derisive laugh. Talent. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Listen, son, this world isn't built for dreamers. People get where they are through skill. And of course by fitting in. And you... His eyes flicked over Nicholas's uniform. Clearly don't belong here. The air felt ready to burst. Nicholas stood his ground, eyes flashing with restrained anger. You say skill? Then why is it that I know more than anyone in this room about your company's balance sheet? Why can I name 3 investments that are quietly draining your profits while your own board seems oblivious? A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Some stared wide-eyed. Others bent over their laptops, hurriedly checking if what he'd said was true. Arthur tilted his head slightly, his smile fading. What exactly are you implying? Nicholas stepped closer, pulling a neatly folded bundle of papers from his shirt pocket. He placed it directly in front of Arthur. This is an analysis I did on my breaks. The data came from your company's public reports. I didn't need special access, only the ability to read numbers and understand how cash flow works. Arthur's eyes scanned the page's charts, figures, projections, all presented with clarity and precision. A few of the CFOs nearby couldn't hide their surprise. You said I don't belong here. Nicholas's voice was slow, deliberate. But maybe it's you who doesn't recognize the true value of talent. Whispers rose across the room. Many eyes no longer saw Nicholas as a janitor, but as someone or something entirely different. Arthur planted both hands on the table and stood. You're playing a dangerous game, Nicholas. His voice dropped but carried easily to every corner. In this company, I decide who belongs and who doesn't. Nicholas inclined his head slightly, but his gaze never left Arthur's. And out there, the market decides who's truly competent and who's just good at putting on a show. In that moment, the silence was heavy enough to crush the air. Arthur realized this man wasn't just an unusually well-informed janitor, he was a potential threat. What he didn't know was that Nicholas had been preparing for this day for a very, very long time. The air in the boardroom was still thick enough to choke on. Beyond the wide glass windows, the city glittered with lights, but inside these 4 walls, the glow seemed swallowed by a tense, suffocating silence. Not a single member of the leadership dared to make a sudden move. Only the steady tick-tock of the wall clock marked time, counting down to something inevitable. Nicholas stood there unhurried, unflustered. He let the silence stretch, as though granting everyone time to feel the weight of the question he'd just thrown at Arthur. Do you truly believe talent has a skin color? Then slowly he moved toward the corner of the room, pulled out a chair and sat down. There was nothing submissive in the gesture. If anything, it carried the presence of a man in complete control of the moment. From a worn leather briefcase he'd brought with him, Nicholas drew a matte black USB stick. Under the fluorescent light, it looked like a small piece of coal, yet every pair of eyes in the room locked onto it. He placed it in the middle of the table and nudged it toward Arthur. Mr. Whitman Nicholas, said, his voice calm but honed like a freshly whetted blade. This isn't just a few pages of financial analysis. Inside here is evidence, insider trades, fabricated contracts, and funds that have mysteriously disappeared, things no one seems eager to discuss. I believe the Securities Commission would find it very interesting. The air seemed to vanish. A couple of directors on the far side of the table shifted in their seats, faces pale as though they'd just felt the cold edge of a knife at their throats. Arthur sat motionless, his grip tightening on the armrests until his knuckles blanched. Are you threatening me? He asked, his voice dropping low, each word pushed through clenched teeth. Nicholas didn't blink. I'm simply presenting the truth, and the truth has a way of making those with something to hide feel uncomfortable. From the far end of the table, the CFO, an older man, notorious for keeping his cards close, spoke in a gravelly tone. Where did you get this data? Nicholas turned his gaze on him, steady but unwavering. All from public sources, reports, transaction records, listed contracts. Nothing illegal. But the question isn't where the data comes from. It's who has the ability to put the pieces together and see the real picture. A tense whisper ran along the table. Someone quietly wiped sweat from their brow. Arthur leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. His voice rumbled like a predator's growl before the lunge. What do you want? Nicholas sat straighter, determination glinting in his eyes. I want this company to change. No more meetings where the voices of people of color are pushed aside. No more hiring based on family names or golf club memberships. No more investments that serve personal greed at the cost of shareholders and employees. If not, he paused deliberately, letting the silence sharpen. Then tomorrow the press will run the story, and this time you won't be able to control the narrative. Near the door, the HR director let out a soft, "Oh my God," and covered her mouth. They all knew they'd reached a dangerous crossroads, either stand with Nicholas or go down with Arthur. Arthur leaned back, trying to mask his fury, though the flash in his eyes betrayed him. You think you can shake me with a few sheets of paper and a USB stick? Nicholas tilted his head slightly, a cold smile tugging at his lips. Not just paper, but truth. And the people out there, people who are sick to death of serving those who believe themselves untouchable. Once again, a heavy stillness settled over the room. No one knew how this would end, but they all understood one thing from this moment on. Nicholas was no longer just a janitor. He was the man who had just lit the fuse to a war that couldn't be undone. Arthur stayed silent for several seconds, fingers interlaced on the table as though calculating his next move. His face was calm, but the twitch at the corner of his eye and the tightening of his jaw betrayed the storm brewing inside. You know, Nicholas, Arthur began, voice low and deliberate. The world isn't made for idealists. I've seen plenty who thought they were clever, who believed they held the truth. But in the end, they were all crushed. Nicholas didn't look away. Then maybe this will be the first time you see someone who doesn't get crushed. A few murmurs stirred around the table. The tension was tight enough to snap. A young marketing director cleared his throat as if to speak, but fell silent when Arthur shot him a glance. Arthur smirked, but the smile was cold, never touching his eyes. You think the media will take the word of a black janitor over the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation? Nicholas's reply was immediate. I think they'll believe the numbers, the contracts, and the documents signed by you. Opinions can be debated. Evidence cannot. Arthur leaned forward slightly, his stare boring into Nicholas. Do you want to be a hero, or do you just want money? No, Nicholas said slowly, each word crystal clear. I want justice. I want those who've been excluded, trampled, ignored, to be given a fair chance. I want a company my son can one day be proud to work for, without fearing he'll be looked down on because of the color of his skin. The words hung in the air, pulling the room into silence. Near the door, the HR director lowered her head, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. Another director, who had kept quiet since the beginning, gave the faintest nod as if in agreement, but without the courage to say so. Arthur exhaled slowly, leaning back with his arms crossed behind his chair. You know, he said, I have an extensive network. One phone call and you'll never work anywhere again. Nicholas smiled faintly. And I have my own network. One click, and all of this data will be sent to over 50 journalists and to agencies whose names you definitely don't want to hear. Their eyes locked. Neither blinked. This was no longer a conversation, it was a chess match, where every word, every gesture was a move on the board of power. Finally, Arthur broke the silence. "What do you want me to do?" Nicholas placed both hands on the table, his voice firm. "First, you make a public apology to every employee who's been treated unfairly. Second, you establish an independent committee to oversee both financial and HR operations. Third, you shut down any projects you and your associates are exploiting for personal gain." A dry, humorless laugh escaped Arthur. "You think I'm going to sign my own death warrant?" Nicholas leaned in, lowering his voice but sharpening its weight. "I think you'll do whatever it takes to keep the Wittmann name from being dragged across the front pages of every major paper." A few seconds passed. Arthur turned his head away, no longer meeting Nicholas's gaze. His fingers tapped slowly against the table, a signal well known to those who'd worked with him long enough he was conceding but didn't want anyone to see it. "Fine," Arthur muttered. "I'll consider it." Nicholas retrieved the USB stick and slipped it into his coat pocket. "You have 48 hours. After that, it won't be in my hands anymore." He turned and walked out, leaving behind a row of faces caught between fear, hope, and suspicion. Arthur remained still, eyes fixed on Nicholas's retreating back, his mind already calculating a counterstrike. This war had only just begun. The boardroom door slammed shut behind Nicholas, sealing a heavy, suffocating silence inside. Arthur sat motionless, fingers gripping the chair. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from rage. "All right, Carter," he muttered under his breath. "If you want to play, I'll play to the end." Without hesitation, Arthur pressed a button on the desk phone. "Get Lawson. Tell him to come here immediately." Less than 10 minutes later, the door opened again. A tall, lean man in a gray suit stepped in. Edward Lawson, Arthur's personal attorney, notorious for cleaning up messes for the elite. His eyes were cold as steel. One glance was enough to know he wasn't the moral type. Arthur summarized the situation in a low, urgent tone. Lawson listened, then allowed a faint smirk to curl his lips. "If what he says is true, that evidence will cost you more than just your company. It could cost you your freedom." Arthur tapped his fingers on the table. "I don't need warnings. I need a plan." Lawson sat down, pulling a thin folder from his briefcase. "We strike first. I've dealt with men like Carter before. All it takes is a fabricated scandal or a civil suit, and his credibility will crumble." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "You mean accuse him of embezzlement? Claim he stole company data to sell to a competitor? We leak it to a few friendly media outlets and file a lawsuit. That way everything he says will be questioned." Arthur leaned back, a cold smile slowly spreading. "Good. Do it." Lawson nodded and rose from his seat. "But to be certain, I'll have someone search Carter's apartment. We'll find something useful." Meanwhile, Nicholas returned to his small suburban apartment. He made himself a coffee and opened his laptop to comb through every single file again. In his gut, he knew Arthur wouldn't stay idle. He'd played the game long enough to understand when you corner a predator, it fights back twice as hard. His phone buzzed. An anonymous text: "Be careful. They're going to play dirty. Don't stay home tonight." Nicholas frowned, his palm tightening around the phone. He didn't know who sent it, but his instincts told him to believe it. That night, he left the apartment, taking his laptop and every USB drive containing the data. He stayed with Marcus, a close friend from his university days, now an investigative journalist for a major paper. The next morning, just as he'd expected, the police knocked on Nicholas's door with a search warrant. They happened to find an external hard drive containing files alleged to be proprietary assets of Wittmann Industries. Within hours, headlines exploded online: "Former employee accused of stealing trade secrets." Arthur sat in his office watching the news on TV, taking a slow sip of whiskey, his lips curling into a victorious smile. But elsewhere, Marcus was combing through the files Nicholas had handed over. He found not only proof of corruption, but also internal recordings. Arthur's voice ordering budget cuts to workplace safety to save costs, managers discussing how they wouldn't hire more people of color into management because they don't fit in. Marcus looked up, eyes blazing. "Nicholas, this isn't just news. This is a nuclear bomb." Nicholas gave a slight nod. "We're going to show him what a counterattack really looks like." He and Marcus began planning the release. Not just to the press, but to human rights organizations, federal investigators, and even a few major investors already unhappy with Arthur. The battle had turned, and this time, Arthur wouldn't see it coming. The next morning, the downtown sky hung heavy and gray, warning of rain. But inside Wittmann Capital's headquarters, the air was heavier still. Rumors of yesterday's tense boardroom clash had spread across every department. No one knew the exact details, but everyone had heard fragments. Nicholas Carter had gone head-to-head with Arthur Wittmann, producing evidence that if leaked could shatter the company's reputation. Arthur walked into his office looking as immaculate as ever, dark gray suit, navy tie, a confident stride. But the keen-eyed would notice the faint shadows under his eyes. Clearly he hadn't slept, spending the night calculating his next move. Arthur's personal aide, a silver-haired man named Clark, stepped in and set a thick folder on the desk. "Mr. Wittmann, here's the report I compiled. We've identified Carter's closest allies. With the right pressure, we could strip him of support almost instantly." Arthur glanced at the file, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Good. But remember, Clark, no traces. I want it all to look like coincidence." Meanwhile, across the city, Nicholas sat in a small cafe near the park. His laptop screen glowed with charts, financial records, and internal emails he'd spent months collecting. This data was his most powerful weapon, but also a double-edged sword. Used at the wrong time, it would only make him the target. His phone buzzed. Maya, an investigative reporter he'd worked with before. "Nicholas, I hear you're in the middle of something big at Wittmann Capital. Anything you want to share?" Nicholas gave a faint, dry smile. "Thanks, Maya, but not yet. I need them to make their own mistake first. Just say the word and I can make this the biggest headline of the week. I know, and I'll call you when it's time." Ending the call, Nicholas leaned back, gazing out the window. He knew Arthur wasn't the type to take a hit and sit still. The counterstrike would come, and it would come fast. Sure enough, that very afternoon, Nicholas received an email from HR. An urgent internal audit was being launched, and he was among the first required to cooperate and provide information. The email was written in polished corporate language, but Nicholas could read between the lines. This was the opening move in a smear campaign. The audit took place in a small meeting room on the 14th floor. 3 people sat across from him: an HR manager, an in-house lawyer, and an independent expert Nicholas knew was handpicked by Arthur. "Mr. Carter," the lawyer began, "we've received reports suggesting you may be involved in certain irregular transactions. Can you explain this?" Nicholas rested his elbows on the table, calmly meeting each of their eyes. "Of course. But first I want to know who made these allegations and on what basis." They exchanged quick glances, avoiding the question. The HR manager simply said, "This is standard procedure. We can't disclose the source." Nicholas gave a quiet chuckle. "Standard procedure? Then my standard procedure is not to answer vague questions without concrete evidence. And if you want to escalate, I'll be requesting legal representation." The audit quickly grew tense, and in the end they had to adjourn, unable to extract anything from him. But Nicholas knew this was just the prelude. That night his phone lit up with an anonymous text. "They're trying to squeeze info from someone in your circle. Be careful. M." He knew at once that M was one of his covert allies, which meant Arthur had begun targeting the people he trusted most. Nicholas shut his laptop, stood, and stepped onto his balcony. The city lights shimmered over rain-slick streets below. He muttered to himself, almost like a promise. "All right, Arthur. If you want a war, I'll show you what a real war looks like." The boardroom now felt starved of air. The earlier exchange between Nicholas and Arthur had left a jagged fault line across the leadership. Some members stayed silent, heads down, scribbling notes to avoid either man's gaze. Others stole glances at Nicholas, their eyes carrying a flicker of hope and a shadow of fear. Arthur rose from his chair, stepping away from the conference table, then slowly turned back as if weighing every move. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice lower now, but every word still heavy as lead. "You think you can walk in here, threaten me in front of the entire board, and expect me to bow my head in submission?" Nicholas sat upright, his gaze locked firmly on his opponent. "I don't expect you to bow, Wittmann. I expect you to wake up." A quiet chuckle came from the corner of the room. Martin Hale, the company's chief legal officer. "Wake up, Nicholas. You're talking to one of the most cunning foxes in the finance world. Men like him don't wake up. They only change when they're backed into a corner." Nicholas turned to Martin, giving a small nod. "Then maybe today's the day." He glanced toward the doorway, signaling someone waiting outside. The conference room door opened, and in walked a woman in a navy blue suit carrying a thick file. Allow me to introduce Nicholas, said Sandra Lewis, an independent investigator. She's been working with me for the past 6 months tracing this company's transactions. Sandra didn't waste time with pleasantries. She set the file on the table and began opening it. Inside were spreadsheets, contracts, printed emails, and images of transactions marked in bold red ink. These records, Sandra said, have been verified by 3 independent sources. And we've already sent copies to the Securities and Exchange Commission this morning. A ripple of unease spread across the room. A few board members reached for their phones, but Arthur raised a hand, signaling them to stop. His face had paled, though his voice stayed measured. You think this won't backfire, Carter? When this company collapses, thousands of employees will lose their jobs, and you'll be the man blamed for destroying their livelihoods. Nicholas tilted his head, eyes steady. I'm not destroying anything, Wittmann. It's your greed that's been eating this company alive from the inside. If anyone's to blame, it's you. The air in the room felt tight as a drawn bowstring. Martin Hale quietly closed the file, as if realizing this battle would no longer stay behind closed doors. I think Martin said we should consider a settlement. Nicholas, if what you're saying is true, the company will have to undergo a full restructuring. But to avoid a media disaster, maybe no settlement, Nicholas cut in sharply. Too many times you've settled just to bury the truth. This time, everything comes to light. Several board members exchanged glances, the split between them now visible. Sandra opened her laptop, projecting a complex transaction chart onto the large screen. Lines and numbers sprawled across it, but every path led back to the same cluster of shell companies with Arthur Wittmann's name standing squarely at the center. Arthur's fists tightened, his knuckles turning white. He knew that from this moment on, there was no going back. Nicholas stood gathering his documents. Mr. Wittmann, you have until the end of the day to voluntarily step down as chairman and cooperate with the investigation. If you don't tomorrow, this story will be on the front page of every paper in the country. He turned and walked out, Sandra following close behind. The door closed, leaving a silent room where every gaze fell on Arthur, a man pushed to the edge of losing everything. That afternoon, the city sky turned a heavy gray, as if signaling an oncoming storm. But for Arthur Wittmann, the storm had begun hours earlier. In his private office, he sat frozen behind his desk. On his computer screen, dozens of urgent emails and messages from shareholders, lawyers, and the media piled up. A few reports had already started to leak, an internal source revealing that the company was under investigation for illegal transactions. Arthur knew that if he didn't act immediately, his reputation would be ruined beyond repair. But the more he thought, the clearer it became there was no way back. For the first time in decades, the confidence of a man who had always controlled the board was giving way to fear. At exactly 5 p.m., his desk phone rang. He picked it up, and Martin Hale's voice came through Arthur. An emergency shareholders meeting has just passed. The majority have voted to demand your immediate resignation. If you resist, they'll release every piece of evidence Nicholas brought forward. And trust me, once the press gets hold of it, you'll have no chance to negotiate. Arthur closed his eyes. In that darkness, he saw the image of Nicholas Carter, the young man he had once looked down on, certain he would be crushed quickly by the machinery of power. Yet now he was the one who had turned the entire game around. All right, Arthur said quietly, his voice almost breathless. I will resign. That evening, Nicholas sat in a small cafe on the east side of the city. He wasn't wearing a suit or a tie, just an ordinary man with a black coffee in front of him. Sandra walked in carrying her laptop. It's done, she said, setting it on the table. Arthur signed the resignation. The board has appointed interim leadership. The investigators will take over the files. Nicholas gave a small nod. He didn't smile, but there was a glint of relief in his eyes. Good. But this was only one battle. The war against those who abuse power and discriminate is far from over. Sandra looked at him as if she wanted to ask something, but let it go. She simply said, Are you going to take a break these past 6 months? You've barely slept. Nicholas took a sip of coffee. Maybe. But before I rest, I want to send a message. He pulled out his phone and opened the draft of an article. In it, he recounted the entire ordeal, not only exposing Arthur, but stressing the importance of transparency, fairness, and standing firm under pressure. At the end, he wrote, They can take your title, smear your name, or corner you in the dark. But if you stand on the side of truth, you will always find the light. The post went live on social media at 10 p.m. Within an hour, tens of thousands of shares flooded in. Former employees of the company joined in the comments, recounting how they had once witnessed injustices and now finally felt vindicated. 3 weeks later, an official press conference was held. Nicholas wasn't seated at the executives' table. He stood in the audience quietly watching. The company's new leader pledged to rebuild from the ground up, rooted in fairness and transparency. As Nicholas left the hall, a group of reporters rushed toward him. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to bring down one of the most powerful figures in the financial industry?" Nicholas stopped, thought for a few seconds, then replied, "I didn't bring anyone down. I removed someone who is destroying the future of thousands of people. That's not my victory, it's the victory of truth." He gave a faint smile, then melted into the flow of people on the street, as if his own story was just one small piece of a far greater picture. That night, the city still blazed with lights. In a small apartment, Nicholas sat by the window, gazing down at the bustling streets. He knew there would be more Arthur Wittmanns out there, but he also knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up and say no to what's wrong, there would always be hope. And for Nicholas Carter, that was exactly why he would never stop.